Before we begin, a heads up. This audio documentary shares personal stories and perspectives about alleged spiritual and sexual abuse. Some content is mature and may be graphic. Listener discretion is advised. If you feel overwhelmed while listening, please pause and seek support from a trusted friend or professional. Parents and guardians, please preview before sharing with minors.
Recording in progress.
I'm wondering, in the second decision regarding our case, it was communicated to our former community that Father Nagorski had acted in an inappropriate way, but that there is no evidence of intentional wrongdoing.
Yeah, so in canon law, criminality requires intention. This is, I think, true in civil law too, although in both cases there are also situations where a person's negligence can also be criminal. But to commit a crime, it's generally the case that one has to have an intention to have acted out criminally or in a manner contrary to the law. They don't have to have the intention of breaking the law, but they have to have the intention of acting in a manner contrary to the law. It seems to me that what the Holy See was saying in your case was effectively, we regard this as a boundary violation. In other words, there was something here that was not appropriate with regard to either human law or natural law or divine law, or something here that was offensive to your dignity as a person, but it can't be proven to be criminal in part because the sort of mind of the Reyes can't sort of be sufficiently meted out here.
I think what I'm a little confused about that is he allegedly assaulted the sister at the center of this case, touched her private parts, and groped her. So you don't slip on a banana peel and do that.
Right. I think, and I have to be careful here because it's my job to sort of keep reporting the story, right? But yeah, I think anyone who says that doesn't resonate has good reason to say that doesn't resonate.
Hi everyone, this is Sister Danielle Victoria. A few years ago, Sister Theresa Aletheia and I did something brave, or something reckless depending on who's listening. We both left the convent and began the long process of beginning a new religious community of nuns, or more technically accurate, religious sisters. We each had entered the convent more than a decade ago, but we felt God calling us to something else, to a new mission to people on the fringes of the church, especially those wounded, abused, or scandalized by members of the church. But for us, this mission wasn't abstract, it was personal. Just after we started our new community, Sister Theresa and I decided that before we began this mission, we needed to tell our own stories of abuse to protect anyone who could be harmed. In 2024, we came forward publicly to share our experience of spiritual abuse at the hands of a trusted priest. This audio documentary delves more into our stories and the nuances and complexity of adult abuse in spiritual settings. This podcast isn't about breaking our silence. We've already shared our story publicly. It's about breaking open how spiritual abuse happens, why it so often goes unnoticed or unaddressed, and how we can begin to build communities that are more honest, more human, and more hopeful. Each of us has a role to play in this work of repair. We invite you to join us in this difficult but essential work. This audio documentary is the first major step in the mission of the Sisters of the Little Way of Beauty, Truth, and Goodness, a mission of listening and solidarity with people on the fringes of the church, especially those who have been wounded, abused, or scandalized by members of the church. If you would like to support our mission and projects like this, please visit sistersofthelittleWay.com. I'll be narrating this episode, but you'll continue to hear both Sister Theresa and I tell our story, because this part of the journey belongs to both of us. In this episode, after arriving in our new diocese, we had found a home. We're preparing to make our vows and begin a mission rooted in healing and renewal. The future feels wide open, but one question still lingers. We haven't heard anything about the second case pending at the Vatican. Has a decision been made in a way that would protect others? This is Descent into Light.
Beginning a religious community was never anything that I wanted to do.
Right? I mean, who really wants to do something like that? Unless you're somebody who probably shouldn't do something like that.
Moving to the Northwest was like a dream come true. The people, the city, the mountains. It's just such a gorgeous place.
It really felt dreamlike in so many ways. I mean, we're in a valley situated among farmland, and our convent surrounded by mountains in every direction.
It was like a dream come true. We could have lived that dream.
Yeah, I just think amidst all of that, I just couldn't ignore what had happened to us and to the other sister. Like, it just had to know. I knew it just ate away at me in the back of my mind amidst all of that, what had happened with our case with the Vatican.
Yeah, when we talked about it, we just both had this concern that people were still in danger of experiencing what we had experienced.
Let's situate ourselves. By this point, Sister Theresa Aletheia and I have already moved to our new diocese. We were living in a convent, but we weren't wearing habits just yet. We weren't going by the title sister. That would come later, after we made our vows. It was a quiet in-between space, a time of waiting and of wondering. Had our former community received a second decision from the Vatican? So we reached out. They said yes, they had, 5 months ago. Our former community had known for 5 months what had happened in a case that intimately involved us, yet they never updated us. That silence and lack of transparency alone was painful, but the Vatican's decision was even more disappointing. We asked our former community to send us a copy of the official letter communicating the decision, but our sisters instead passed along quoted sentences. Father Dave had, quote, acted in an inappropriate way, but with no evidence of intentional wrongdoing, end quote. The consequence? He was barred from serving as a spiritual director for a mere 5 years. We hadn't expected a clean resolution or some redemptive fairy tale, but we had hoped that more would be done. Now we had clarity. We knew what we had to do, in conscience. In this episode, we arrive at a new stage of grief, acceptance. Reality is setting in, but not the kind that says, this is fine, or this was fair. But we have accepted that our lives have been shaped in a way we never chose. But that doesn't mean it defines us. Now we were moving forward with all the information we had been seeking for years. We know this might cost us everything, but we also know that our peace comes not from outcomes, but from Jesus. This is Descent into Light. Welcome to Episode 7, Exposed to the Light.
The second decision came back, and it was that Father Dave was banned from being a spiritual director for 5 years. We both took it to prayer. We considered the decision that had been reached, and we believed that Father Dave was still a danger to women under his spiritual direction, even after a 5-year break.
And not only that, we were not even sure if that 5-year ban had begun when the case was sent in 2018, or when the case was decided in 2022. So if it were the former, that would mean that Father Dave would begin directing women again really soon, if he had not already, right?
Yeah, we had no way of finding out that information. We knew that our only other option was to speak openly about our experience to protect other potential victims.
Just 1 month after we found out the decision from the Vatican, Sister Theresa Aletheia and I made our private vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience for 1 year in our new private association, the Sisters of the Little Way of Beauty, Truth, and Goodness. We made our vows with sincerity and firm belief that this was what God wanted from us. The peace and sacredness of this moment were tangible. A vow, according to the Catechism of the Catholic Church, is an act of devotion in which the Christian dedicates himself to God or promises him some good work. We felt called to consecrate ourselves to God and dedicate ourselves to a mission of listening and solidarity with people on the fringes of the church, especially to those who have been wounded, abused, or scandalized by members of the church.
Remember when we made our vows, we had already decided to come forward publicly about our stories. So that colored my experience of making our vows for the first time.
Everything felt tenuous and bittersweet, really.
Yeah, I felt that too. But I also felt really deep peace, like God was present and He deeply wanted our mission.
At the same time, I felt so deeply that no matter what happens, if I wasn't willing to risk everything, then I knew that I wouldn't be prioritizing what was most important.
Yeah, I felt the same way. I mean, this isn't true for all survivors. Not everyone has an obligation to tell their story publicly, but our mission is related to abuse. So the moment we put our security before speaking out about abuse, including our own, is the moment we're not faithful to our mission or to God.
With surrender and trust in you, O God of glory, I, Danielle Victoria,
I, Sister Theresa Aletheia Noble,
vow to serve people on the fringes of the church, especially those who have been wounded, abused, and scandalized by members of the church.
I vow to live poverty, chastity, and obedience, according to the statutes of the Sisters of the Little Way of Beauty, Truth, and Goodness. Heavenly Father, I trust you will give me the grace to be faithful to you until my death.
In the 12th century, Saint Hildegard of Bingen, a Benedictine abbess and polymath, had a vision of the church as a majestic woman, stunning, radiant, dressed in splendor. But her face was smeared with dust, her robe was torn, her cloak had lost its brilliance, her shoes were blackened, and with sorrow she cried out, "Hear, heaven, how my face is sullied. Mourn, earth, that my robe is torn. Tremble, abyss, because my shoes are blackened. My bridegroom's wounds remain fresh and open as long as the wounds of men's sins continue to gape." Centuries later, in 2010, Pope Benedict XVI reflected on Hildegard's vision in the context of sexual abuse by clergy. He said, "In the vision of Saint Hildegard, the face of the church is stained with dust, and this is how we have seen it. Her garment is torn by the sins of priests. We must accept this humiliation as an exhortation to truth and a call to renewal. Only the truth saves. We must ask ourselves what we can do to repair as much as possible the injustice that has occurred. Only the truth saves." Sister Theresa and I staked our lives on this belief, and when we decided to tell our stories honestly, we would have preferred to stay quiet. We didn't know how people would respond if we came forward publicly with our stories of being groomed, or what it might cost. But we did know that many survivors face being misunderstood, questioned, or quietly dismissed when they speak out. They're just angry, or they hate the church, or they're unstable. These are narratives that have lingered for decades, and we knew that we would likely not be exempt from them. That awareness weighed heavily on us, but it also clarified something essential. These narratives are not only untrue, they're harmful, and they prevent truth from coming to the light. Survivors are not a threat, and pain does not cancel out our credibility. It's easy to burden survivors with expectations about how they should sound or come across. We expect survivors to present themselves in a way that makes us comfortable, but that expectation can become a way to avoid confronting the truth they reveal. Honesty is not a weakness. It's a strength. Many survivors hold unique insights into how abuse happens and how it can be stopped, and their presence in the church is not a disruption. It's a gift. In the spirit of this conviction, we decided to share our stories publicly. We didn't do this lightly. We informed our bishop. We called friends and family members beforehand so they would not be shocked by the details we shared. And in the end, we entrusted it all to God, knowing that we could only take the next step trusting in Him. So Sister Theresa and I reached out to J.D. Flynn and Ed Condon of The Pillar, two investigative journalists committed to truth and accountability in the church. We were ready to tell our story.
My name is J.D. Flynn. I am the editor of The Pillar, which is a Catholic journalism project focused on public accountability in the life of the church. I thought that your story was interesting and important for two reasons. One, there is a continued underappreciation for abuse or misconduct oriented towards adults in the life of the church. Sexual abuse, spiritual abuse, abuses of power. I think since 2002, we have been talking about safe environments and abuse and misconduct oriented towards children. And although the church is not without sin, I think it's actually extraordinary the degree to which the church has incorporated a culture of safeguarding with regard to children since 2002. Things that would have been normal there, like being alone in a car with a child, now like everybody knows are unthinkable, and that's good. But we haven't similarly grappled with the notion of various kinds of abuse or misconduct towards adults, and especially I think we have significantly underappreciated the prominence of that in contemporary religious life. Your story was illustrative of that. It was also, I think, illustrative of many of the challenges of reporting and reaching a just outcome in the institution of the church, and the reason why people who do report things are often unsatisfied, as you were, by the outcome that you achieve or don't.
So how was telling JD your story for you?
Oh, at first I really was trembling. I was so nervous and stuttering. And I think I was realizing that it was the first time I was telling someone who wasn't a part of the story in some way, the story. But JD understood immediately, and I felt really deeply received and heard.
Yeah, I talked to both JD and Ed, and I was so scared too at the beginning. I think when you've experienced something like this, I knew what happened to me, but you feel scared that other people won't believe you. And so I felt scared, but that fear went away almost immediately because they were so understanding. And the moment I started recounting different things, they immediately understood what I was talking about.
I know moving forward it won't be perfect, but I think we're at a really important place in history if we choose to support survivors who come forward.
It's just so important to believe people who come forward with these stories. It's so difficult. I was really grateful that the sister who alleged that Father Dave had sexually assaulted her spoke to JD and shared her story anonymously.
On January 15th, 2024, our stories were released in The Pillar. We held our breath as the article went live. We knew that what we had shared would be controversial. We knew the risk. But almost immediately, messages began pouring in. Emails, texts, calls, so many people thanking us, supporting us, promising prayers. In many ways, we credit that overwhelmingly positive response to The Pillar's readership. People who are perhaps more familiar with the dynamics of spiritual and sexual abuse and more willing to listen. But alongside the encouragement came something colder, subtler. A silence that was harder to name, but just as real. Victim blaming is an interesting concept, one that we all, if we're honest with ourselves, can observe in our reactions to people and events. But nothing teaches a concept more clearly than experiencing it. In the week following our article being published, we navigated the discomfort of people who didn't know what to say or didn't want to say anything at all. People who looked away when they used to look at us in the eye. People whose voices changed and who suddenly kept their distance. Those moments, they hurt deeply. But even in the hurt, we knew it wasn't for nothing. Even if no other survivors came forward, we knew we had done the right thing and we told the truth. And then Months later, the story widened.
So we reported your story, which were allegations of manipulation in spiritual direction, sexualization of spirituality, grooming behavior, which becomes a kind of control, and in one case, a sort of very clear case of an allegation of assault. We covered that story, and then subsequently we heard and reported that there had been, prior to your case, allegations in another religious community about misconduct on the part of Father Nagorski with regard to religious sisters.
Okay, so here's what happened. In April of 2024, 3 months after our stories were published, The Pillar broke another story. Another community of religious sisters had suffered under the spiritual direction of Father Dave. And these cases, they weren't recent. The pattern was older than we realized. After we shared our stories, The Pillar reported that another community of religious sisters had filed a formal case against Father Dave with the Vatican. We are thankful that the sisters brought a case forward. It took courage, and we honor that. But it's hard not to wonder, if Father Dave's behavior had been reported back when it happened, or if anything else had been done to prevent him from hurting others at that point, would our stories even exist? We also wonder, was Father Dave's religious community ever told what happened? And if they were, why didn't they do anything? To be honest, from our perspective, Father Dave's religious community has shown little evidence that they grasp the gravity of his behavior. Their silence has been deafening.
What was it like to work with Father Dave's community?
Well, I think it would be an overstatement to say that I worked with Father Dave's community. I have frequently sent them questions. They have infrequently acknowledged those questions, or I should say not acknowledged those questions. There seems to be on the part of the OMVs an unwillingness to address this publicly. And this is the thing is, why should they? What they have now is one guy who they can dismiss asking these questions and writing these reports. I mean, lots and lots of Catholics, I think, now know these stories and these allegations. And I want to be clear, there has not been a trial. Until there's a trial, they are indeed allegations, right? But lots and lots of people know these stories and these allegations and responded with great disappointment or discouragement about them. But I think the OMVs have seemed to elect not to clarify Father Nagorski's status with regard to ministry or status in the community. And I think the impression of a lot of people is effectively hoping to ride it out. And a public relations person would actually tell them that that's the right thing to do. The question is whether a theologian would tell them that was the right thing to do or not. In the church, we have to assess these things not only from like what's the best public relations management, but what does the Lord want us to do here? And that's obviously a very different discernment.
At the beginning of every Catholic Mass, we ask for forgiveness, saying, I confess to Almighty God and to you, my brothers and sisters, that I have greatly sinned, in my thoughts and in my words, in what I have done and in what I have failed to do. That last line, "in what I have failed to do," echoes painfully in this situation. Father Dave's religious community did almost nothing in response to serious allegations from multiple religious sisters, including grooming and sexual assault. Instead of expressing concern or acting in a way that suggests they grasp the gravity of the situation, they responded with cold formality, lawyers, paperwork, and silence. We want to be fair. Many of these men are kind-hearted, pastoral, and sincerely devoted to God. And yet, when it mattered most, many seem to have chosen silence, to look away. Why? That's a question only they can answer. But if they want to move forward with integrity, they must start by asking these questions themselves. As we've said throughout this series, abuse doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens in cultures that reward silence and punish truth-telling, where saying, "that felt wrong," is met with, "you're being dramatic," where the burden falls on survivors, not on those who misuse their power. Abuse thrives when no one is willing to be the first to speak up. That's why creating truly safe environments, churches, schools, convents, seminaries, requires all of us. Safety doesn't come from perfect policies. Abuse can still happen with policies in place. What matters most is people willing to be inconvenient, to speak up, to recognize warning signs and act. Our mission as Sisters of the Little Way is a call to the Church to act, to listen, and to stand in solidarity with those on the fringes of the Church, especially those who have been wounded, abused, or scandalized by our own members. But this mission doesn't belong to us alone. It belongs to anyone who refuses to look away. Will you be one of them? Join us at sistersofthelittleWay.com. So here's the good news. Preventing abuse doesn't require expertise in psychology or canon law. It simply requires awareness, a willingness to pay attention, not just to others, but to our own behavior too, because abuse isn't about bad apples. It often comes from ordinary people in unchecked systems. Still, we must be clear. In the Catholic Church, bishops have a unique and essential role in preventing abuse and helping to create a culture that is both human and safe. Their choices shape how the Church responds. To explore what courageous Episcopal leadership looks like, we reached out to someone who's been living it, Bishop Andrew Cozzens.
My name is Bishop Andrew Cozzens, and I am the Bishop of the Diocese of Crookston in Minnesota, which is in the northwest corner of the state of Minnesota, north of Fargo. I became a bishop in 2013 in the Archdiocese of St. Paul, Minneapolis, and I was named an auxiliary bishop at that time. And it just happened to be that my nomination to become a bishop happened at the same time of a breaking of the abuse crisis in the Archdiocese of St. Paul, Minneapolis. I had never worked in the chancery. I hadn't dealt with any of these issues. I just had to be thrown into these situations.
For decades, the Catholic Church in the United States has been grappling with a painful reckoning, the widespread reality of abuse and the cultures and systems that enabled it. But now, it's not a hidden crisis. It's a defining issue for the Church. And like Bishop Cozzens, most bishops today inherit this crisis. Few, if any, know what it's like to lead a diocese without the weight of abuse cases looming over their ministry from the very beginning. But how each bishop responds to these cases, especially adult abuse cases, still varies dramatically, because just as abuse happens in a context, so does the handling of abuse. And contexts that are shaped by silence, fear and denial, or complacency don't dissolve overnight. It takes courageous leadership to disrupt them. It takes someone willing to challenge the status quo. That's what makes Bishop Andrew Cozzens' story worth paying attention to. He didn't ask to become a leader in a moment shaped by scandal and trauma, but that's exactly where he found himself. At first, he confronted abuse out of necessity, but then something shifted. He chose to go further. He didn't stop at policies or protocols. He made a conscious decision to build real relationships with survivors, to listen, to learn, and to let their voices shape his ministry. Bishop Cozzens explains more.
From the moment that I was named a bishop, I had a sense that the Lord wanted me to be a healing instrument. And I didn't know what that would look like, and I didn't know how that would be, but that was like the sense from the Lord. I need you to bring healing. And then I was contacted by a few victims of abuse and started to spend some time listening to them. One of those victims was a victim of adult abuse, and she had been a religious sister when her abuser met her. The abuse happened after she left the convent, but he met her when she was a religious sister. And so just got to learn her story, and so also learned about the complex issues of abuse of adults from her, and then just have had the privilege of walking with her for about 12 years now in spiritual direction as she's tried to walk that path of healing. Every story of abuse is unique, but it was helpful for me to see this particular story because she was an adult, but it was so clearly an example of a power imbalance. And it was clearly manipulative in the way that this particular priest entered into abusing this young woman, because he was her spiritual director, and then he was using the information that he had gained from spiritual direction to then open doors in her that would allow him to ultimately abuse her. So was a kind of overt manipulation. And it was just so clear in hearing the story. Like, what struck me about it was I'm a spiritual director and I reverence that space of spiritual direction so much as such a sacred space. And I know from my own experience of being a directee how vulnerable it is. And so it really made me actually quite angry that somebody would abuse that vulnerable space and then manipulate it for his own selfish advantage.
One of the survivors who Bishop Cousins has learned from is Gina Bartle. In 2019, she courageously came forward and shared her story at great personal cost. Her honesty paved the way for others, including us, to speak up, and her story is painfully familiar. Gina was groomed by a priest who began spiritually directing her while she was in a religious community. After she left the convent, the manipulation intensified. The priest used the intimate knowledge he had gained through spiritual direction to draw her into a sexual relationship. And it gets more disturbing. The priest who abused Gina belonged to the same religious community as Father Dave. The grooming tactics, the spiritual manipulation, the imbalance of power, they're all hauntingly similar. But here's what's even more chilling. When Gina reported her abuse, it was Father Dave who received her complaint. At the time, he was the U.S. leader of that same community. He removed the priest from ministry, and later Father Dave himself will go on to act out nearly identical patterns. At first, this might sound like an eerie coincidence, but if you followed our story this far, you know better. Abuse in the church isn't random. It's not just the work of a few bad actors. It's the result of patterns, cultures, environments that allow abuse to happen and keep happening. In that kind of system, it's no surprise that other priests from the same community followed similar paths. What is surprising and disheartening is how little willingness there seems to be publicly to confront these patterns. You might think maybe this community just failed to screen out these men. But decades of research show that most perpetrators of sexual violence don't fit a clear psychological profile. They aren't easily flagged in formation or filtered out by testing. They are often likable, trusted. They appear ordinary until they're not. And that changes the question. Because if abuse doesn't always come from people with serious pathologies, then the real danger isn't just who abuses. It's where abuse happens. It's how certain environments make abuse easy. Here's what that looks like. Imagine you're in a store or someone's home and you see something you want. A fleeting thought enters your mind. What if I just took it? Most people wouldn't. But what if you knew you wouldn't get caught? What if there were no consequences? That's how abuse often works. It's not always premeditated. It's opportunistic. And when the environment allows it, when there's power imbalance, silence, deference, and no accountability, people make devastating choices. That's why we can't outsource abuse prevention to psychologists or background checks. Those help, but they're not enough. The responsibility falls on all of us. And this is where it gets uncomfortable. We say we want change. We call for accountability. But when the spotlight turns to our own communities or ideologies, we resist. Real reform costs something. It asks us to let go of what we cling to: reputation, belonging, status quo. And many of us aren't willing to pay that price. But abuse doesn't care about tribal lines. It happens among progressives and conservatives, charismatics and traditionalists. Every camp has its blind spots. If we only look for abuse in the other camp, we'll miss what's happening in our own, and that makes us part of the problem. So this isn't just about stopping people who abuse from abusing. It's about changing the conditions that allow them to thrive. It's about choosing integrity over denial, truth over comfort, and that change starts with each of us. Because this isn't just a moral issue, it's a gospel issue. The credibility of our message depends on how we respond to abuse. What we do or fail to do says everything about what we really believe. J.D. Flynn explains more.
The church also has this long-standing tradition of saying that evangelization and catechesis and even pastoral care stem from the interior life of the person who is doing the proclamation of the gospel. And the idea is if you're rotten or empty inside, how compellingly, authentically, reasonably, or efficaciously can you proclaim the gospel? I think the same is true corporately, that if we are tolerating systems and structures of sin inside the church or refusing to open our eyes to them, that's an impediment to our effective proclamation of the kingdom. So there's I think this metaphysical dissonance there that shouldn't be tolerable to us. And we should know that that metaphysical dissonance will certainly come up at our judgment. I think we can't underestimate the degree to which the claims of the gospel are compromised by or falsified even by the existing structures of sin in the life of the church. In the same way that we hear about these religious orders that were slaveholders, the Jesuits had all these slaves and things like that. You think to yourself, how could anybody compellingly proclaim the gospel while holding other people's bodies as property? Who would believe them? That you think the gospel sets captives free if you have captives, right? Unjustly. And the same thing is true here. Who would believe that the gospel transforms us into love itself if we engage with people in a manner which is inimical to that?
We're beginning a religious community, so when we talk about what can go wrong in a culture, I think along the way we're acutely aware that we are talking about ourselves too.
Yeah, if you're going to talk about the roots of abuse, abuse of power, spiritual abuse, those are things that people can do without even realizing that they're doing it.
Yeah, I think the thing I've learned from these experiences that we're sharing is that this is not about good people versus bad people or good communities versus bad communities.
Yeah, and I think if a community portrays itself as perfect, then that's really dangerous because we can't create communities that are sterile and perfectly safe from abuse. But we can choose integrity over personal safety and reputation. We can choose to apologize when we've made mistakes.
I really believe we can face the darkness, not only outside, but within ourselves and within our communities.
Yeah, I think that is what grace makes possible. Jesus makes it possible to face our own darkness. And that is the best thing that we can do to prevent abuse in our communities.
Pope Benedict XVI once said, "Being Christian is not the result of an ethical choice or a lofty idea, but the encounter with an event, a person, which gives life a new horizon and a decisive direction." But what happens when we lose that direction? What happens when our faith becomes detached from the person of Jesus Christ, especially his presence in the most vulnerable, and instead becomes a tool for preserving comfort, protecting reputations, and avoiding conflict? What happens when sacrifice is replaced by self-protection? We all know what happens. People suffer in silence. Survivors walk away not because they've stopped believing in Christ, but because they no longer believe they are safe in his church. Because too many times when they cried out, they were met not with compassion, but with suspicion, delay, and denial. And those watching from the outside, they see it too. They notice the cracks beneath the polished veneer. They can tell when a community hasn't done the real work. And they stay away. Because when we refuse to reckon with the deep roots of abuse, when we fail to acknowledge how power, silence, and institutional self-interest continue to shape our responses to abuse, then we cease to be a credible witness to the gospel. In our mission as Sisters of the Little Way, Sister Theresa Aletheia and I have seen this firsthand. We've sat with the wounded, we've listened to those who have left, and we've come to believe many people don't walk away from the church because they've lost faith in God. They walk away because they've lost faith that the church is willing to face the truth. They sense what we often try to ignore, that real reform costs us something, that healing can't begin until we stop managing perceptions and start telling the truth. So where do we go from here? Bishop Cousins offers the path forward that he has found in his own ministry.
Having to shine the light on all these areas in my own experience, has become the only way forward. My experience is that those things are hard and they're painful, but they're worth it. And they're worth it because, as I've talked about, it just leads to truth and healing. And so it's actually important to deal with these things as clearly and objectively as possible. And so I would just encourage bishops as well to say, okay, make sure you have good processes for dealing with any kind of accusation, children or adults, and that you have good people in place who will help you do good investigations, and that you're not afraid of those processes. If bishops and lay people want to support survivors, what I would advise is they just listen to survivors. You just learn so much by listening, and I've learned so much about the effects of trauma, and especially the effects of clergy sexual abuse trauma, just from listening to survivors. If someone listening has been harmed by the church, the first thing I always say is, I'm very sorry, and in the name of the church, I want to ask forgiveness for what happened, but I don't actually expect forgiveness right away, because I know that that can be a really hard thing to deal with. And I hope that if you're listening and you've been hurt by the church, that you might find someone in the church who would be able to allow you to experience how Jesus sees you and how Jesus sees this abuse and how upset it makes him and how he doesn't will that and how much his heart is hurt by that and how much he desires for you to know the great love of his heart and how sorry he is that this has happened to you. The heart of Jesus always weeps for our sins, but especially when innocent people have been hurt. And so I hope that you'll find a person who believes you, whom you can trust, who can reveal that heart of Jesus. Even if you have to find it outside the church, I hope you'll be able to find that.
So when we shared our story, it was immediate that the reception that we received from the online world, it was really supportive for the most part.
For so many, sharing our stories the way we did gave language for people who knew what they had experienced and had been sitting with it very deeply but didn't have words to say it out loud.
Right. But at the same time, we received a lot of positive responses, but I am not surprised that people do not come forward with these stories because not every response was encouraging.
Yes, some responses were so deeply discouraging. I think I hadn't experienced discouragement at that level actually in my life. One of them was, I remember a priest really had been a close friend, stopped being friends with us and expressed like really deep anger at us for sharing our story publicly. And he told us that we were damaging the church by doing what we did.
Yeah, it just seems like no matter how survivors tell their stories, it's never good enough or done in the right way for some people, and that was just so deeply discouraging and painful.
Listening to survivors is a key step forward in the Church's journey of healing. Yet sadly, many survivors still face significant challenges when they speak out. The stigma around naming abuse remains painfully real. We don't just know this from research or stories, we lived it ourselves. When we first shared our stories publicly, the responses were deeply mixed. While many people expressed support and gratitude, others made it clear they wished we had stayed silent. Still, we knew we had done the right thing. We had no regrets, but the cost was real. After a series of complex events, some related to us telling our stories and some not, it became clear that we would need to seek a new home diocese. We've chosen not to share the details of those circumstances out of respect for everyone involved, including ourselves. What we can say is this: just after making our first vows, just after settling into what we thought would be our long-term home, we found ourselves uprooted again. We needed to begin again. The thought of knocking on new doors after everything we had just been through felt daunting, almost impossible. And then when we least expected it, a letter arrived. It was the sign we needed, a reminder that even in the upheaval, even in the uncertainty, God was still at work, still writing our story.
After we told our stories, that was just such a difficult time. I was feeling really discouraged by the response that had happened and other things that were going on. And in the midst of that, we found out that we had been accepted to the safeguarding program. And that was in Rome. Father Zollner had recommended it to us. And I just felt like that was, amid all that difficulty, that was God telling us that he was with us.
It's really crazy because you're thinking, in the year of hope, we're going to Rome. This is a moment when our hope really felt fragile. It just felt like God was so in charge. He had our future, and he was still making a way forward.
That's really the only reason why I can do this work, because I feel like Jesus is with me.
I do think the Catholic Church can be at the forefront of abuse prevention and even the prevention of adult abuse throughout the world, and partially because the Catholic Church is a worldwide organization, and we have the capacity to share what we've learned from one culture to another, and cultures deal with these things very differently. And I do think some of that's happening in really helpful ways with child sexual abuse. The United States had to deal with this, and we were forced to deal with it because of the criminal things that happened and the lawsuits, and in our own kind of awakening to the reality. But we've had to deal with it, and that's affected international church law. The United States Charter for protection of young people has in many ways become international church law, and that's affected other countries, right? And so that same thing could happen in other countries. I do think some of that's already happening, and I think we have an opportunity to do more. And that's part of the goal of sharing these things at an international level and developing good law throughout the church that can help us to deal with it on an international level.
Bishop Cozzens makes a powerful observation that's worth pausing to consider. As we've discussed, the global structural nature of the church means that harmful patterns, like clericalism or institutional silence, can take root and spread. But the same is true of virtue. Just as vice can be systemic, so can goodness. Back in episode 5, we introduced the concept of mimesis, the imitation of desires. And mimesis can be either destructive or redemptive. In this context, positive mimesis means that reform, when genuinely and virtuously lived out, can inspire others to do the same. But for that to happen, we need leaders who model the right kind of desires. Not the desire to protect the institution, but the desire to put survivors first, to put Jesus first. That kind of witness takes courage. And we're already seeing it. Because the U.S. Church was forced to publicly confront widespread abuse, its responses, imperfect though they are and were, have shaped how other parts of the world are now addressing these same issues. It may be surprising to hear, but the Catholic Church as a global institution leads the way in child protection in some countries, precisely because of the reforms prompted by all that unfolded in the U.S. That said, many of you listening know firsthand how much work still needs to be done here in the U.S. So we're not suggesting that the institutional betrayal that many survivors experience is behind us, nor are we claiming that the U.S. Church holds all the answers for the global church when it comes to abuse prevention. This is absolutely untrue. But we are saying this. We are at an important juncture. As a global church, we are facing a crucial opportunity, not just to respond, but to lead when it comes to preventing adult abuse. At this moment, we have a chance to be proactive instead of reactive. So what would that look like in practice? Well, for one, hearts and minds have to change, and that's the hardest part. Misunderstandings about power, consent, and victim blaming are still deeply ingrained in church communities. Recognizing that some relationships with power differentials lack the possibility of true consent takes time and education, and that education starts by listening to survivors. Then, there are also concrete reforms we can make around how church leaders currently approach canon law and create the processes around it. J.D. Flynn explains more.
We have good law. I mean, it's not perfect, but we have pretty good law. The issue is that the law is not being used. Pope Francis, for example, made a lot of laws about the adjudication of cases of clerical sexual abuse or clerical sexual coercion or manipulation towards adults, and the way in which those cases are supposed to be tried. And yet we still see the kind of thing in which we saw in your case, which is effectively a kind of administrative extrajudicial review without the opportunity for the things which a criminal process affords, like advocates and proper what we call interrogatories or depositions and things like that. So we have good law. The question for the church is why and when don't we use it?
So the church has good law that can be built upon to protect adults in vulnerable situations. The issue that J.D. Flynn is pointing out is that these new laws need more clarity as to how they are applied, and the adjudication of these cases need to be more thorough, consistent, and transparent. We will get into that more in the next episode, but for now, let's briefly explore the crux of it all. Right now, many dioceses have policies around children and what are called vulnerable adults, which almost always refers to adults presumed to be without full mental capacity or adults that are functionally like children. This definition of a vulnerable adult is problematic on many levels. First, each person's situation of disability or mental awareness is unique. And second, sometimes the vulnerability of a person's situation is more dependent on the contextual reality than their physical or mental state. So we need laws and policies that define the situations in which any adult can be vulnerable within a power differential. Right now, canon law is in place that could be applied effectively in this regard. The problem is that these laws are applied differently all over the world and without an overall consistency or transparency. Even within the United States, the bishops currently have a lot of discretion when it comes to handling adult abuse. And this leads to survivors' cases being handled inconsistently, which is clearly not a recipe for justice. Bishop Cousins explains more why there's a need for more clarity around this issue in the church.
The term vulnerable adult has a history in the church. And historically, it usually means a person who doesn't have full mental capacity. So it's an adult who is actually in some ways a minor, because they don't have full mental capacity of an adult, like a handicapped person or a person of special needs, right? Those are surely vulnerable adults, right? But the experience of the church, certainly in the United States, and I'm sure around the world in the last decade, is that there are other kinds of vulnerabilities that make it possible for abuse to happen amongst adults. And so I wonder sometimes if we need to speak, instead of about vulnerable adults, if we need to speak about a power imbalance. So to recognize that sexual activity that happens in one of those contexts where there's a power imbalance is very different from sexual activity that happens outside of that context. Abuse is, again, my definition, not canon law's definition, but it's the manipulation of another person for my own benefit. And when I have authority over another person, so a spiritual director has authority, right? And deserves and needs a certain amount of trust for the relationship to work. Certainly in religious life, there's authority, right? And all the authority is good and necessary. Spiritual direction, when used rightly, is really good for people. And so is religious authority. All those things are really good. But when it's abused, that is, I'm doing something for my own benefit. I'm manipulating this person for my own benefit, not for their benefit or not for the benefit of the church. Then I think we're entering into an area that can be abuse. And if that involves sexuality, then it's sexual abuse. And so I think we need to speak about it in those kinds of categories. And that's certainly what we've seen. Obviously, the McCarrick case is the thing that brought all this to the forefront. in a helpful way, because that was clearly a case of a bishop with seminarians that involved this kind of power imbalance. If the seminarian says something, he's probably going to get kicked out of seminary, or he doesn't feel like he can say something. This is the bishop, after all, and he's in charge. And what can I say about his uncomfortable advances? That's clearly abuse. And so we have to figure out a way to speak about it and to make it illegal in the church, right? That's the key.
As Bishop Cousins just shared, the first step is legal. The church must establish clear laws and processes that explicitly name and prohibit circumstances of adult abuse. That part is relatively straightforward, but the real challenge? Convincing those with the authority to enact change. And an even greater challenge is helping all of us in the church understand that our attitudes on this issue matter deeply. In fact, it's urgent. This cannot wait. Preventing abuse is not just about creating better policies. The deeper remedy must be woven into every part of church life. It has to shape how we live and how we share the gospel. We would learn more about what this hard work would involve during our studies about abuse prevention in Rome. But first, we had to get there.
So I was so excited to go to Rome and study abuse prevention, but we were in a situation where before that could happen, we needed to find a new diocese and a new bishop. And it just felt impossible on some level. We had months to do that.
Yeah, in a matter of just a few months, we needed to raise $28,000 to cover the cost of travel, to study, we had to pay for the course, and then living in Rome. So our clock was ticking.
And, we were totally willing, if it was necessary, to go to Rome, not as sisters, to stop wearing the habit, not be called sisters. And we believed that people would have supported us in that if they understood it was kind of a complicated situation. But I just felt deep in my bones that God wants us to do this as sisters. So just to think of that possibility was sad for me.
Yeah, I think we were ready to obey the mystery of the reality, but we also prayed for a miracle. And I think that again, that part of God's signature in our journey, that has been what has formed us in the beginning.
Right. So many moments of impossibility where the impossible becomes possible. But every moment you're like, is this going to be possible?
We knew the odds. What bishop would take us on? Two women who had just told their stories of clerical grooming publicly, a controversial mission, and a mission of solidarity with people on the fringes of the church. We reached out to friends discreetly. We asked for guidance. We sent out a few carefully worded emails. We were searching for a bishop who believed that our mission was worth the risk. Silence. Days passed. Then weeks. No answers. No open doors. Just the quiet hum of our uncertainty growing louder. We began to wonder, had we stepped out in faith only to find that no one would catch us? Would the flame of our calling be stifled before it even began? And then, just when we were about to let go of hope, something happened. Something that changed everything. This audio documentary is the first step in the mission of the Sisters of the Little Way of Beauty, Truth, and Goodness, a mission of listening and solidarity with people on the fringes of the church, especially those who have been wounded, abused, or scandalized by members of the church. If you would like to support our mission and projects like this, please visit sistersofthelittleway.com.
Born to die to free all men from their criminal ambitions. All this pain that I've embraced, it's a vicious repetition at the hands of men who long for power and position within the body. This is my body.